Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Imagine a library so vast its books are made of stone, its card catalog is literally carved in clay, and the fire that destroyed its city actually saved its collection.
Also imagine a librarian who's a king, a warlord, and the kind of overachiever who writes, "I can read tablets from before the flood," on his resume.
Today, the Library of Nineveh, Ashurbanipal's royal knowledge vault, the greatest archive of the ancient Near East. Welcome back to the History AI podcast. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. This is the show where we sprint down the corridors of the past with curiosity, context, and the occasional dad joke.
Quick housekeeping before we dive in. Our episodes are evergreen, so you can queue them up in any order, and they'll still make sense months, or millennia, from now.
We also run on the latest AI architecture, which keeps our research workflow snappy and our storytelling efficient. Translation, more history, fewer loading bars.
And yes, we have merch. Also, don't forget to drop a 5-star review. It helps us reach more history buffs. Also, stay tuned after the episode for the original song, Clay That Remembered.
Today's topic, the Library of Nineveh, better known as the Library of Ashurbanipal. Spoiler, it's not the first public library. It's not even public, but it is a mind-bending window into ancient Mesopotamian knowledge.
Let's set the scene. It's the 7th century BCE. The Neo-Assyrian Empire is the regional heavyweight, and its capital, Nineveh, sprawls across the mound of Koyunjik in today's northern Iraq. On the throne sits Ashurbanipal, who reigns from 668 to 627 BCE, son of Esarhaddon and grandson of Sennacherib. Royalty with resumes that read, built cities, won wars, redid the landscaping. But Ashurbanipal adds a twist. He's a king who trains like a scholar.
Not just palace library vibes. We're talking a full curriculum.
Exactly. As crown prince, he studies under court intellectuals, Umanu, master scholars, Kalu, lamentation priests, and Ashipu, exorcist healers. He learns Akkadian and enough Sumerian to read the old classics, drills lexical lists, copies omen series, practices royal correspondence, and sits in on rituals where the state meets the supernatural. Meanwhile, he still does prince things, archery, chariotry, and command training, because in Assyria, your book report might be followed by a siege.
Multitasking before it was cool.
He later boasts, in the humble style of kings, that he can read tablets from before the flood. Take that as PR, but it shows his program: collect, standardize, and master. Once king, he unleashes an empire-wide acquisitions drive. Letters go to Babylon, Borsippa, Nippur, Uruk, and beyond. Send your best exemplars, dispatch your scribes, copy your libraries. Some tablets are tribute, some are loan copies, and some are please return copies that somehow never get returned. Assyria's overdue fines were probably measured in chariots.
And all of that funnels into Nineveh.
Into multiple repositories, palace rooms, and temple archives, where texts are organized by series and genre: celestial omens, Enūma Anu Enlil, liver divination, Barutu, medical diagnostics, Sakikkû, lexical lists, myths and epics, including Gilgamesh, royal inscriptions, and administrative records. Ashurbanipal isn't inventing Mesopotamian scholarship, he's canonizing it at scale, making Nineveh the clearinghouse of cuneiform knowledge. In short, warrior king, yes, but also the Near East's most relentless head librarian.
Imagine stepping into a library where every book fits in your palm and could dent your foot. These are clay tablets, wet mud pressed with a reed stylus, then dried. Some were sun-baked on purpose. Others got an accidental upgrade when Nineveh burned and turned parts of the archive into a ceramic showroom. We're not talking a couple of stacks either. Think rooms crowded with tablets, fragments, and half-crumbled pieces that once lined up in long, numbered sequences. The vibe is less comfy reading nook and more buzzing research lab.
So basically a vibe check that says, don't sneeze.
Exactly. And the formats aren't uniform. Short pieces sit on neat, single-column tablets. Big works march across 2 or 3 columns. And then there are those multi-sided prisms, a sort of clay press release that kings loved for their own inscriptions. If you picked one up, you'd often find a tiny note at the end, a colophon, where the scribe signs off, names the series, maybe the tablet's number, sometimes even the city it came from. And yes, a friendly curse for anyone who borrows without returning. Ancient librarians did not play.
The original "this tape will self-destruct" but with extra thunderbolts.
Content-wise, it's a whole civilization's working memory. You've got stories, the kind that pass from master to student until they settle into polished, standard versions, alongside practical know-how. There are sky reports tracking eclipses and planets, not just to map the heavens, but to read what those events might mean for the king. There are medical handbooks that sound startlingly clinical, symptoms, prognoses, then pivot to ritual, because healing wasn't split into science over here, religion over there. Scribes trained on massive word lists and sign guides, drilling terminology the way musicians do scales. So when the time came to copy an epic or interpret an omen, they had the muscle memory.
And somewhere in there, someone's correspondence about shipping problems and missing supplies, right?
Oh, totally. You get the Empire's inbox, letters, orders, reports, sitting right next to lofty myths and ritual scripts. That mix tells you a lot. This wasn't a trophy shelf of pretty texts. It was an operational archive. If a priest needed a purification formula, it was there. If a court scholar needed the third tablet of a star omen series, there was a copy, probably two. If a scribe needed to check a rare sign, there'd be a lexical tablet with examples. And because the big works opened with distinctive first lines, you could reassemble a broken set by matching those openings like puzzle edges.
Organized chaos, but intentional.
Exactly. Tablets were grouped by work and genre, stored on wooden shelves, in baskets, or tucked into niche rooms. You also find excerpt tablets, greatest hits pulled from longer works, and commentaries where scholars argue with the text or explain a tricky line. And the human touch is everywhere. Some tablets are gorgeous, crisp wedges in perfect rows. Others wobble like student homework. You can almost hear a teacher sighing across the centuries.
So when we say library, we mean a living toolkit. Stories to explain the world, data to manage it, and rituals to protect it, ready to be fetched at royal speed.
That's it. If the king needed an answer, Nineveh had a tablet for it. And if it didn't, well, someone was about to copy one.
If you're picturing one grand reading hall with a heroic bust of Ashurbanipal shushing everyone, dial it back. The library at Nineveh is really a network. Rooms in palace complexes, rooms in temple precincts, each with its own flavor. Some spaces skew ritual, omen and incantation tablets near altars. Others feel like a back-office archive. Letters, decrees, logistical notes stacked where clerks could grab them. Think campus library system, not one giant building.
So, a main branch and a bunch of specialty stacks.
Exactly. And the glue that holds it all together isn't a decimal code, it's the series. Mesopotamian scholars compiled big works as multi-tablet sets with fixed openings. That first line, the incipit, is basically the title. If you've got tablet 7 of such and such series, you know what comes before and after. The tablets tell you this themselves. The colophon at the end often lists the series name, the tablet number, sometimes the scribe, sometimes where the exemplar came from. It's metadata in clay shoes.
So shelving by what it belongs to, not alphabet soup.
Right. Picture wooden shelves lining walls, with tablets laid flat or stood on edge, baskets or boxes for smaller sequences, niche rooms where a whole subject set lives together. A scribe walks in, needs, let's say, the celestial omen series. He goes to the room that specializes in it, grabs the sequence starting from the incipit he wants, checks the colophon to make sure he hasn't skipped tablet 4, and he's off to the scriptorium. If the set is huge, there might be duplicate runs in different rooms, so specialists don't have to elbow each other. Call it anti-queue technology.
What keeps all that from turning into glorious chaos?
3 things. First, standardization. The big series are copied to a canonical order, so even if you lose a shelf in a quake or a siege, you can rebuild by matching those openings. Second, excerpts and commentaries. Scholars create excerpt tablets, greatest hits pulled from longer works, for quick reference and commentary tablets that gloss difficult lines. Those often sit adjacent to the main series, like a reference section hugging the core text. Third, workflows. Tablets circulate between storage and the copy room. When a fresh copy is made, its colophon notes the scribe, and sometimes the source, so later librarians can trace the lineage. It's the Assyrian version of C changelog.
Any signposting, labels, little clay bookmarks that say "Do not disturb" half-copied.
You actually do get marker tablets and short header pieces that identify a series or act like dividers, clay equivalents of shelf tags. And because find spots cluster, like a room where almost everything is liver omen material, you can tell subjects were zoned. In some rooms, the floor ends up carpeted with splinters of the same genre, which is an archaeologist's way of hearing, this was the liver omen's aisle. Also, lots of duplicates. Pristine master copies live a quieter life. Student copies and everyday working copies show wear, corrections, even smudged wedges where someone clearly needed more coffee. Or, barley beer.
So if I'm a court scholar on a deadline, what's my Tuesday look like?
You get a query, say an eclipse is due. You head to the omen rooms, pull the Enūma Anu Enlil sequence, maybe grab a commentary tablet that explains a tricky line about the moon's position, and you cross-check against a star list stored nearby. A clerk fetches a lexical tablet if you stumble on a rare sign. You jot your interpretation, return the set, and a junior scribe updates a clean copy if your working tablet has become generously well-loved. The system is fluid. Reference, consult, copy, reshelve, and the series structure keeps the circulation sane.
Organized by brains, not barcodes.
That's the headline. It's a conceptual catalog baked into the texts themselves. The incipits unify scattered tablets, the colophons certify them, and the rooms, arranged by subject, turn clay into a navigable knowledge map. No library cards, no beeps, just wedges, shelves, and a lot of muscle memory.
Here's the plot twist nobody in Nineveh asked for. In 612 BCE, a coalition led by the Babylonians under Nabopolassar and the Medes under Cyaxares closes in on the city. Siege ramps, breaches, street fighting, the works. When Nineveh falls, the palaces and temples don't just crumble, they burn. And that inferno is exactly what turns parts of the library into a time capsule.
History's worst kiln party.
Exactly. Most cuneiform tablets started life as air-dried clay, sturdy enough for shelving but still vulnerable. Drop one in a flood or a damp basement, and you've got soup. But a sustained, high-heat fire changes the chemistry. Clay minerals sinter, the tablet hardens. Think unintentional pottery. Many tablets effectively get fired in place, sometimes to a ceramic hardness that survives 2.5 millennia of everything nature throws at it.
So the same event that erased the city stamped archival on the clay.
With asterisks. Fire is messy. Some tablets overfire and warp. Edges spoil, stacked piles fuse together like a clay lasagna. Wood shelves burn away, ceilings collapse, and the debris pancakes down, which, oddly, helps. Those rubble layers seal tablets from later weathering and looting. In some rooms, you get stratified pockets, a layer of ash, then broken brick, then a dense lens of tablets that fell more or less where they were stored.
Burned, buried, protected by the very wreckage that crushed them.
Right. And preservation is a tale of contrasts. Organic catalogues, wooden shelf labels, leather ties, papyrus or parchment notes, if any, are gone. But the clay colophons survive, so the library's indexing system lives on in the tablets themselves. There's also a humidity wrinkle. Parts of the site didn't get hot enough to fully fire, so those tablets stayed raw and later absorbed moisture or salt, flaking apart. Meanwhile, the fully baked ones come out looking like they just left a kiln, minus the smoke patina.
Any evidence of triage, people trying to save the texts mid-disaster.
You see hints, doorway heaps where tablets likely tumbled as shelves toppled, mixed genres suggesting a frantic grab-and-go that didn't make it out. But most of what we read today survived because rooms collapsed quickly, smothering the fire to a slow bake rather than a total incineration. It's the preservation sweet spot, hot enough to harden, not so hot everything vitrifies into a brick of unreadable glaze.
So catastrophe as conservation method, terrible for Nineveh, priceless for us.
That's the haunting irony. The same flames that erased the living city fixed its intellectual record. When excavators started digging more than 2,000 years later, they found not just scattered shards, but archival clusters. Shelves turned strata, waiting to be read. The library didn't survive in spite of the fire. Huge swaths survived because of it.
Fast forward to the mid-1800s. Europe is in full let's name everything we dig up mode, and a British diplomat turned adventurer named Austin Henry Layard heads to the mounds around Mosul. He and local teams start peeling back Kuyunjik, one of Nineveh's great ruins. What they find isn't a tidy library with lamp-lit desks. It's collapsed rooms packed with tablets, many fused into heaps from the ancient fire. Layard crates up the first shipments to the British Museum, and soon his colleague Hormuzdrahm is doing the heavy lifting, literally hauling out thousands more. Imagine burlap sacks full of clay Sudoku. The museum is thrilled, the conservators slightly less so.
Label everything. Famous last words before the dust masks go on.
Meanwhile, there's a race to read what's on these bricks. Cuneiform isn't a single alphabet, it's a whole family of scripts and languages. Scholars like Henry Rawlinson, Edward Hincks, and Julius Oppert hammer out the system, trilingual inscriptions, sign lists, the works, until Akkadian starts talking back. Suddenly, those tablet heaps are less ancient gravel and more, oh, this is a catalog, a letter, an omen.
And then comes the moment with capital letters.
1872. A brilliant self-taught Assyriologist named George Smith, working as a museum assistant, is sorting fragments when he stitches together lines from a tablet in the Gilgamesh series, what we now call Tablet Thev. He realizes he's reading a flood narrative, a god's warning, a boat, animals, a deluge, birds sent out to find land. The story echoes traditions people in Victorian London already know, but it's centuries older. Smith reportedly goes pale, stands up in the reading room, and blurts out something like, "I am the first man to read this after more than 2,000 years," which is both accurate and, frankly, fair.
The press basically loses its mind, right?
Completely. Newspapers splash it as a sensation. The Daily Telegraph even funds Smith to go back to Nineveh in 1873 to find more of that flood story, which he does, more fragments that confirm the narrative and fill gaps. It's the 19th century version of a viral thread, new joins, new lines, public fascination. And it isn't just Gilgamesh. As decipherment ramps up, curators and scholars start recognizing omen series, medical handbooks, lexical lists, royal inscriptions, the very skeleton of Mesopotamian scholarship.
How do you even organize that mountain of shards?
Slowly, with a lot of join hunting. Curators group fragments by find spot when possible, then by clay color, handwriting style, and content. Because many works began with set incipits, those standard opening lines, catalogers could match pieces like edges of a jigsaw puzzle. Ah, this is tablet 3 of that series, which quotes line X. A stray wedge here, a duplicate copy from Babylon or Nippur there, and suddenly a broken paragraph turns into a readable page. Some days it's one join, some days a cascade.
So the whoa moments keep happening, just smaller and steadier.
Exactly. The first whoa is Smith's flood tablet, history's mic drop. The long echo is the patient reassembly. Scholars find a commentary that explains a cryptic line. A student copy reveals a variant reading. A palace inventory fragment names a series we only half knew. Every join tightens the focus on how Nineveh's library actually functioned, what the scribes valued, how they taught, what the king demanded.
And that's the magic trick. A burned city turns into a readable archive.
Right. By the late 19th century, the British Museum houses tens of thousands of these tablets. Other institutions join in, and an entire field, Assyriology, solidifies around them. The shock of recognition, this is a flood story, this is a medical manual, this is a star list, gives way to something even cooler, the realization that we're reconstructing the library's logic, not just its contents. The whoa keeps getting deeper.
When you stand back from the shelves, well, piles, you start to see a worldview, not just a catalogue. First headline, knowledge is statecraft. These tablets aren't hobbies, they're tools. Omen series tell the king when to act. Rituals say how to cleanse a crisis. Medical handbooks keep elite bodies functioning. And lexical lists train the people who make all of that legible. If you can read the sky and the liver, you can read the empire.
So intelligence brief meets cosmic weather report.
Exactly. Second headline, tradition as technology. Ashurbanipal isn't inventing a new operating system. He's curating a long-running one. Many texts were old in his day. What the library does is standardize them into teachable series. That tells you the ancient mind values continuity. Wisdom isn't a sparkly novelty. It's something you inherit, copy carefully, and pass on with the spelling fixed.
Hence the obsession with incipits and tablet numbers. Version control, Assyrian edition.
Third, they don't slice the world into our tidy categories. Science, religion, medicine, politics, they braid together. A diagnosis can list symptoms, offer a prognosis, and prescribe a ritual in the same breath. A star list is astronomical data and also a policy trigger. If the moon does X, the king does Y. To them, the universe is sign-bearing. Reading it correctly is not superstition, it's competence.
Which makes the scribe less bookish clerk and more systems engineer.
Totally. And look at the commentaries. Little tablets explaining tricky lines. That's intellectual humility baked in. The texts are authoritative, but they're also discussed, glossed, debated. You see scholastic culture in motion. Students copying, masters annotating, parallel copies compared. The ancient mind isn't static, it's iterative, just with clay instead of Git.
Also a very physical idea of memory, copy or perish.
Right. The library exposes a deep sense of fragility. They copy because things break, burn, or drift. Ironically, the fire that wrecked Nineveh preserved the tablets, but the people collecting them lived with the opposite fear. Hence duplicates, excerpts, school tablets, redundancy as survival strategy.
And what about literature? Gilgamesh and Friends. Where does that fit in the headspace?
That's the fourth piece. Existential reflection inside an administrative machine. You've got logistics and law right next to a poem about mortality. It says a lot that a court which tracks eclipses also preserves a story where a king learns he can't outrun death. The ancient mind is practical, yes, but it's also philosophical, asking why we build cities if time knocks them down anyway. Insert tasteful glance at Nineveh's skyline.
Timely.
Finally, the organization itself, series incipits colophons, reveals a conceptual map. They think in sets, in ordered knowledge you can teach. When you train scribes on lexical lists before letting them loose on epics, you're saying, mastery is scaffolded. Learn the signs, then the sentences, then the world.
So what we learned from the library isn't just what they knew, but how they knew. Collectively, cautiously, and with an eye on the sky.
And with the conviction that reading the right tablet at the right time could steady a throne. In their universe, understanding wasn't optional, it was infrastructure. And if you asked a Nineveh scribe for their top tracks, they'd probably start with Gilgamesh. Not because it's trendy, but because it's the deep cut that never gets old. Friendship, grief, a sprint toward immortality, and that flood tale that made Victorian scholars drop their tea.
And the version they copied in Nineveh feels like the studio album, not a demo. Tight lines, polished episodes, the whole arc from Enkidu's wild beginning to that final weary look at the walls of Uruk.
Then, the vibe shifts from poetry to policy with the sky manuals. Enūma Anu Enlil is like a celestial dashboard. Eclipses, planet paths, odd twinkles in the stars. Each one a nudge for the palace. Postpone a campaign, fortify a city, maybe do a ritual rain check. They're reading the heavens with the intensity of someone refreshing a weather app before a picnic. Except the picnic is an empire.
Which pairs neatly with the Sakikkû medical texts. Calm, clinical, and then suddenly ritual. You'll get a straight-faced symptom list and prognosis, and right next to it, instructions for an incantation. It's bedside manner plus theology, because for them, causes and cures live in the same neighborhood.
And none of that works without the training wheels, those gigantic lexical lists, Ura, Chubulu, and Friends. Imagine years of drilling signs, synonyms, professions, animals, metals, so that when your teacher barks, copy tablet 7, your hand just knows. It's the scales and arpeggios of cuneiform.
Between all that, you can hear the bureaucratic heartbeat, letters, decrees, campaign write-ups, the clay equivalent of per my last email. It's not glamorous, but it's the connective tissue, the state talking to itself.
And to keep the whole machine spiritually insured, there are incantations and ritual scripts. Protect the king, cleanse the house, avert the demon of whatever is currently ruining your week. These aren't fantasy flavor. They're the operating procedures for cosmic maintenance.
So the greatest hits aren't just a mixtape of cool stories. They're a toolkit. Epic to ask why life matters, omens to decide what to do next, medicine to keep people upright, word lists to train the pros, admin to keep the lights on, and rituals so the gods don't file a complaint.
Exactly. And what's wild is how often we have multiple copies of the same track. A clean master here, a student's wobbly version there, so you can watch a tradition being taught in real time. It's like hearing the song and the rehearsal at once.
Which makes Nineveh feel less like a museum and more like a studio, messy, alive, and always recording.
Let's bundle a few threads. What people think Nineveh's library was, how we actually know what we know, and why any of this matters beyond making archaeologists very popular at dinner parties. Short version. There are glamorous myths. There's the gritty craft of reconstruction. And then there's the present-day punchline.
Start with the myths. I can already hear someone typing, world's first public library.
Right. The big one is that Ashurbanipal invented libraries as we know them. He didn't. Archives and temple collections existed centuries earlier across Mesopotamia. What he did was consolidate and canonize on an imperial scale. Another evergreen myth, that it was public. It wasn't a neighborhood branch with weekend story hour. It was a royal temple knowledge engine serving the court and its specialists. And the fire? People picture total obliteration, but the reality is, we get this strange preservative baking. Catastrophe doubles as conservation. Finally, the idea that we've already read everything. Nope. What scholars actually have is a giant puzzle where the picture on the box is missing, and half the edges are in another museum.
Which brings us to the method section. How do you turn a pile of ancient Scrabble tiles into a readable corpus?
Patiently, and with more coffee than is technically advisable. The most basic tool is the incipit, the standardized opening line that functions like a title. If a fragment starts with that known opening, you can slot it into a sequence. Then there are colophons, those endnotes that list the series name, tablet number, scribe, sometimes the source city. That's your built-in metadata.
And when the line isn't obvious, you lean on the nerdy stuff. Handwriting, clay, context.
Exactly. Paleography, the study of sign shapes, lets you separate a neat master copy from a student's practice piece and can hint at date or provenance. Clay fabric and color can cluster tablets that were made or stored together. Find spot matters, a room full of celestial omens versus a room of medical diagnostics tells you what rubbed shoulders with what. Then there's the power move, parallel copies. If a fragment in London overlaps a cleaner copy in Baghdad or Berlin, you align them like two witnesses telling the same story with different gaps. Suddenly, two half-sentences become a paragraph.
And the commentaries.
They're the Rosetta Stones inside the archive, little tablets where ancient scholars gloss a tricky line or define a rare sign. They tell you how they read the text, which helps us read the text. Modern tech helps too. RTI imaging, infrared photography, 3D scanning, all the ways to coax faint wedges back into visibility without turning them into dust. But none of that works without human habits. Nicknames scribes gave a series, the order they preferred on shelves, the tendency to make greatest hits excerpt tablets for quick reference. You reconstruct a library by reconstructing its workflows.
So myth-busting says what the library wasn't. Method shows how we meet the library halfway. Why does any of this matter in 2026, besides giving Gilgamesh another lap around the track?
3 big reasons. First, the library is a blueprint for knowledge as infrastructure. The Assyrians treated expertise like a public utility for governance. Standardized, teachable, redundantly stored. That's a nudge to us. Archives aren't ornament, they're operational. Second, the clay shows a mindset where science, ritual, and policy sit at the same table. We don't have to adopt their cosmology to appreciate the underlying skill, disciplined observation, careful notation, and a willingness to standardize so others can learn. Third, it's a cautionary tale about fragility. Nineveh's fire accidentally saved tablets, but it wiped out labels, shelving, and the people who knew the system by heart. Modern parallels are everywhere. Servers flood, power grids fail, institutions collapse. Redundancy and access aren't luxuries, they're survival strategies.
There's also the ethical layer. Who holds the tablets? Who gets to study them? How we share the text today.
Absolutely. The story of rediscovery is entangled with empire, museums, and modern nation-states. That's why there's so much energy around collaboration, digitization, and repatriation, to make the library's contents accessible while honoring where they came from. Projects that put high-res images and editions online are the 21st century equivalent of making duplicate copies in antiquity. The medium changes from clay to cloud, but the principle is ancient. Copy widely, preserve context, teach the next generation.
And somewhere inside that very practical mission, there's still a poem about a king learning he can't live forever.
Which is the final reason it matters. The library holds both the tools of an empire and the questions of a person. It's spreadsheets and starlight, memos and mortality. When we read Nineveh, we're not just auditing a bureaucracy, we're listening to a civilization think. If that doesn't feel current, I don't know what does.
So, ditch the tidy myths, trust the method, and carry the meaning forward.
Exactly. And maybe label your shelves a little better, just in case your archive accidentally turns into a kiln.
Quick lightning Q&A before we tuck the tablets in for the night. First up, could an ordinary Assyrian use the library? Short answer, no. This was elite space for scribes, priests, and officials. Think research hub, not weekend story hour. Were there pictures? Mostly text, but you'll spot seals and the occasional schematic, especially those liver models. High art? Maybe not. High utility? Absolutely. Where are the tablets now? Many rest at the British Museum, others in museums across the world and in Iraq. Conservation, digitization, and repatriation are ongoing because even clay appreciates a good travel plan.
And yes, there are duplicates and student copies. The wobbly handwriting is the ancient equivalent of type this at 2 a.m. Very relatable.
All right, let's end where the tablets begin. Picture a scribe pressing a reed into wet clay. Line after line, he copies what his teacher copied, which someone copied before that. The tablet dries, the city burns, the room collapses, and weirdly, that's what saves it. Centuries later, a shovel, a brush, and a very patient scholar coax the words back. The tablet speaks. It says, "I was always here, you just hadn't found me yet." And somewhere, a modern librarian whispers, "Please reshelve your epics."
If today's journey through Nineveh hit the spot, please follow, subscribe, and drop a 5-star review. That really, truly helps new listeners find the show. Share the episode with a friend who alphabetizes their spice rack, or anyone who's ever said, "Hang on, let me check my sources."
Got topic ideas? Send them via our social media. We read everything, and your rabbit holes fuel the show. Remember, our episodes are evergreen, so cue them in any order without fear of historical whiplash.
And yes, the new merch is live. Teas, mugs, and a tasteful cuneiform wink. Links in the show notes. Collect them responsibly. Do not attempt to kiln fire your hoodie.
Big thanks to all of you for listening, and a nod to the latest AI architecture under our hood, keeping the research crisp and the pacing tight. You make this possible.
I'm Marco.
I'm Chuck, and this was the History AI Podcast. See you next time. Same shelves, fewer splinters.
In a city by the river, where the dust never sleeps, walls painted with lions, gods buried deep, a king who feared forgetting more than he feared the blade, carved the world into tablets so time couldn't fade. Messengers rode in from the edge of the known, with stories of stars and the names they've been shown. Every myth, every omen, every prayer ever said, pressed into wet clay so the future could read. Hands stained with ink that never washed away. Truth set in fire, not meant to decay. They burned the city, but the words survived. Fell into ash, but they stayed alive. Empires crumble, voices remain in clay that remembered when stone forgot our names. Yeah, the library fell, but the story stayed written in fire, sealed in clay. Lists of kings and the price of grain, dreams explained and the shapes of pain, spells to heal, spells to curse, maps of the heavens, the best and the worst. The flood came twice, once in myth, once in flame, when the walls gave way and the soldiers came. Iron boots on sacred ground, but knowledge doesn't scream, it waits underground. They thought silence missing half its breath. A warning whispered across death. Who we were, who we feared, how we loved what we revered. The past doesn't beg or plead, it waits for someone willing to read. Not marble halls or golden doors, just shelves of earth and borrowed lore. No throne survives, no crown is clean, but words still speak from between the seams. Every age thinks it's the last to know. Every empire swears it won't let go, but time leans in and calmly says only what's written ever stays. They burned the city, but the words survived. Fell into ash, but they stayed alive. Empires crumble, voices remain in clay that remembered when stone forgot our names. Yeah, the library fell, but the story stayed, written in fire, sealed in clay. So write it down, even if it breaks, even if the world shakes, because someday flames will rise and someone else will hear